This story has heart. Heart ripped, still beating from bloody chest. Heart. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Today I have a review for you of Sundown in San Ojuela by Olivas, and this is being published 19th of November, and I received a complimentary copy in exchange for an honest review. This story is like a free fall into history and mythology and where those two intersect, and it is a lot of fun. I had a great time with this story. The premise is somewhat basic. You have a young woman named Liz, and she also in her orbit is her younger sister, Mary, who's about 5 years younger. And at one point, they were living in San Ojuela, this town, with their aunt and their father. From maybe when Liz was about 9 to when she was about 14. And when she was 14, this thing happened to her there where, as a result of it, she is now able to see ghosts. And that isn't a spoiler, that's right in the jacket copy. And then around the same time, something happens with her father, where her mother comes and takes her away, so her and Mary have to leave. And now she's 19, so it's 5 years later. They haven't gone back to this town that whole time. And her aunt dies, her aunt Marisol dies, so her and her sister and her mother have to go back to this town. They have to go deal with this house and with the death of their family member. And so she's returning to this site of ghosts, both literal ghosts and figurative ghosts. And she has to try to reconcile what happened to her and where it came from and try to find that part of her that she feels is missing as a result of what happened to her in the house. And when they get there, they find out there is a lot more going on than they bargained for. So it isn't just her searching, there's all these other storylines that interweave with her experiences. And you find out as she traces her history that in her family line, she has indigenous Mexicans or Mesoamericans that come from an Aztec lineage, as well as Spanish lineage. Spanish being the conquistadors that came and took over Mexico, right? And so there are these within her lineage, she has this bifurcated lineage of both colonizer and the oppressed. And that is something you see over and over again in the story. That's one of the main ideas is this idea of colonization, not just colonization of land or colonization of culture, right? But colonization of identity, of ancestry, colonization of personhood, of memory. And those are the struggles that she's navigating. And on top of her family having this lineage, you also have another character who has a white father and Mexicano parents. So there's further colonization. So there are all these levels of multiple identities, having lineages that weave in and out of each other. And what does that mean for who you are today? So part of Liz's journey of trying to find out what happened to her and who she is understanding where she came from, where her family came from. So there are all these questions about identity and about what we inherit and how does that inheritance place us in the world? How does it situate us within a larger culture, a larger context? You know, what's especially interesting with Liz and Mary is that their mother, who is Latina, doesn't want anything to do with Latina culture. She wants to fit into quote unquote American culture. So she doesn't want them to even know Spanish. So they barely know any Spanish. Meanwhile, her father and her aunt, who they lived with for quite a long time, speak primarily Spanish. And not only that, you have all these Nahuatl terms. So Nahuatl being a language from the indigenous Mexican communities, from Mesoamerica, from the Aztec communities. So there are all these Nahuatl terms that are mixed in as well. Even the name of the home they go to is Casa Coatl. So casa obviously being Spanish, but Coatl being the Nahuatl term meaning coyote, right? So there's this mix of identities and this mix of legacy that she is constantly grappling with and the story is grappling with and it's really really exciting. When she goes home, she meets up with a friend that she had when she was there, Julian, and the two of their aims both intersect but also diverge. And so you follow both of them throughout the story. I think the characters are really, really wonderful in this story. The main character, as well as all of the ancillary characters, are complicated, they're interesting, they are messy, they're weary. There's like a level of exhaustion that almost all of them have been doing this for so long that they just want to get through with it. They want to have answers and they can't find them. But then you have this like bright spurt of energy with her younger sister, actually, who is kind of oblivious to some of the heavier things going on, at least in the beginning. So the characters all feel really well realized. You want to spend time with them. They're, well, not with all of them. One character, especially, you don't particularly want to spend time with. That's the sheriff. And that brings up my next point is that the writing, I think, is really, really good. The sheriff is one of the characters you occasionally get a POV chapter for. Primarily, you get chapters for Liz and then the sheriff and for Julian. Sometimes you get from her sister or some ancillary character, but those are few and far between. Mainly, it's those main three. But the thing is, whenever you get whenever the chapter's from the point of view of Liz, it's written in a close third person that's really intimate, that's really close, that gets you in her mind, but still lets you observe her from a distance. Whenever it's written from the point of view of the sheriff, it's first person, and not only that, there's no punctuation, so the dialogue isn't set apart from the rest of the narrative. And so it throws you into kind of the chaos of his mind. Now, the sheriff is the one who has a white father and has a Latina mother, and his whole life is about complications. He originally worked for ICE, for immigration control, before becoming a sheriff, and so his family doesn't have a great opinion of him, and the things he did as an ICE officer and now as a sheriff kind of weigh on him. And so he's trying to prove himself in a world that looks down upon him for being Latino. Both his first and last name are white passing, and he is living in more than one culture. And so his chapters come with this kind of chaotic first person narrative. And then when you have chapters from Julian, especially as it gets later on in the book, those chapters are often written in the second person, which is a very disorienting way to read. But due to his narrative and what's going on with him, it makes perfect sense for his character. So the author has managed to balance these three different writing styles as they accompany different characters through the book. And it really goes a long way to not only developing character, but also setting atmosphere and mood and making you understand these complicated relationships that are happening within the story. But aside from those three, all of the other characters, there are a number of ancillary characters: the mother, the aunt, the younger sister, the caretaker from the house, and then a few others you meet here and there. All of them feel like they have these rich backstories. None of them feel like placeholders. All of them feel like people that the author knew. You feel comfortable with all of them, which is amazing. And then in the writing itself, not only do they write the characters in such an interesting way, but there's a number of Spanish dialogue that just is mixed in with the text, and there's no translation. And as our main character doesn't really know Spanish, she gets frustrated sometimes. There's some ghosts that speak to her in Spanish, and she's like, "Come on, please speak in English." So as a reader, you share that experience with her. And I have 4 years of Spanish study, so I can understand about maybe 90% of the Spanish that's in there, but not all of it. And that, I think, is a very similar experience to the main character. So that informs the writing, and it helps set the mood and helps create the atmosphere. And you add that, not only is there Spanish language mixed in with the book, but also this Nahuatl, so this Aztec language as well. Because the family and their culture and the mythologies are these indigenous Mexican mythologies that are mixing with the present day. And so that fine line between your history and the mythology of your peoples are intersecting. And so the supernatural forces that may or may not come into play are coming from their lineage, from their history. And in addition to the supernatural forces, there is the inclusion of brujos and brujas, so witches, who are engaging in brujeria, so witchcraft. And that witchcraft itself also is colonized sometimes by the outsiders coming and trying to make claim to this indigenous practice. So you see these multiple kind of supernatural elements combining through the different characters and through how the storylines intersect with each other. And they all give you this really wonderful kind of gloomy vibe, this vibe where everything is on a razor's edge and you don't know what's going to happen next. None of it looks good. There's like dark clouds everywhere, that kind of feeling. The author has created in this atmosphere and through their writing this twilight world, a world where the mythic and the unreal are reality. There is no distinguishing line between what is believed and what is real. And that creates endless opportunities in this world, but it also creates confusion and doubt because our main characters all have different goals and different ideas of what reality is. And when reality blends with mythic history, then you can no longer align yourself according to what you think you know. So the characters are really great. The story is simple, but it is a useful vehicle to explore these ideas that are brought up. The world building and the atmosphere is really spot on. The writing is really beautiful. It isn't lyrical, I wouldn't say, but it is kind of ethereal. It is mythic. It has this flavor of something supernatural that brings you in. So it isn't just straightforward, boring prose to move the narrative along. It has something, an edge to it, like an electric edge that motivates it. So the writing itself is very enticing. It's enchanting, and it pulls you in. In this world, Aztec deities walk hand in hand with witchcraft, who walk hand in hand with colonized magic. Like, it is an incredibly diverse world, and it feels really alive. I would have liked there to be a little bit stronger sense of place, that the actual title of the story, it involves Sundown in San Ojuela. It names the town, and I don't have a strong sense of geography, so I didn't really feel like I was in that town. Like why that town is different than all the towns around it. There is an atmosphere, there is a mood, there is world building that's done really well, but returning home to this town is also like an important part of the journey. And I would have liked a little bit of a stronger sense of the actual town itself, of the kind of geography or of the sense of space of the town. So that I think is missing a little bit. It doesn't detract from the story because the mood is so beautiful and it is so encompassing that you don't really feel the loss of it, but I would have liked a little bit more. And as long as I'm going to nitpick, I think the pacing was a little bit scattered, especially in the beginning. It felt a little slow. The first half or so was a lot of setting up dominoes and getting introduced to the world and the characters, and it did that effectively. I never felt bored. I never felt like I was dragging my feet. Part of the writing being so kind of enchanting and so ethereal is that it isn't especially propulsive in that front half. And so I'd finish a chapter and I wouldn't feel a need to immediately right away turn the page and start the next chapter. So it didn't pull me really strongly through that first half. The narrative and the story and the characters compelled me. I wanted to keep reading. I was, like I said, I was never bored, but it didn't have that kind of you have to turn the page right away feeling. And I would have liked a little more of that in the front half. There was a lot of setup and a lot of character development, and that was all useful. The span of the story only takes place over a few days, but then there are a number of flashbacks, and I thought that was a useful device, and it did keep things interesting and kept you moving along, having these flashbacks and going back and forth. But there could have been just a little more momentum in that first half, and I think that would have served the story well. On the flip side of that, having that first half be, I won't say lethargic, but having the first half kind of move slowly meant the back half was even more explosive. So all the dominoes they set up fell down in spectacular fashion. So that type of pacing where there's so much setup in the beginning, when there's that pivot moment, it does transform in really compelling ways. So, that contrast is notable. It would have been nice to have a little more steady pacing in the beginning, but I can't really complain because I had such a good time with the story. And as I mentioned, the writing, the world building, the characters, the story itself, and the introspective nature of looking at identity, of looking at bifurcated and colonized identity, looking at family, looking at legacy, and not just looking at family or loyalty or belief, but all of those things under the shadow of colonization and under the shadow of coercion. What happens when you inherit multiple conflicting legacies? How do you stay loyal to all of these identities when they are butting heads and when they don't want the same thing and when they don't expect the same thing of you and when they take things from you against your will or even without your knowledge and you have to fight for your ability to find those parts of yourself again? So this story does give you a lot to feast on, not just in the writing and characters and world building, but also in the ideas. And I enjoyed every second of it, and I highly recommend it. I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If any of you had a chance to read this yet, what do you think about going home again and trying to find the parts of yourself that you think you had lost or that were taken away from you? What about these dueling identities, and what does it mean to face the legacies you've inherited that conflict with each other sometimes? Those are interesting things to explore. I'd love to hear your thoughts on them down in the comments. But for now, thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Be kind to yourself, take care of each other, and go slowly.